And welcome to the Priceless podcast. Today, of course, with a new guest. We are traveling again to the Netherlands, but before we get to my new guest, I will say a few words before we start. First of all, this podcast is made in partnership with the European Forum of LGBT Christian Groups. If you want to give a donation to the European Forum and or the Priceless podcast, you can find all the information in the podcast description, as well as some links that might come up during our conversation. My new guest today is Willy Elhorst, and he's from the Netherlands, from Amsterdam. And we already talked to him a little bit. We talked about the RISE research. But today I wanted to talk to him a little bit more about himself, because he's a long year. I don't know, is that a word? Actually, he's an advocate for LGBT people, especially in churches, for many, many years. But I don't want to introduce him to you. He can do it himself. So hello, Willy, welcome. And can you say a few words about yourself, who you are?
Hi, Michael. Nice to be with you in the podcast. It's such an honor. What shall I initially tell about myself? I was born in Zaandam, which is a town to the north of Amsterdam. Born in a Salvation Army family. I was fourth generation already. An important part of my young life was formed by my experiences in the Salvation Army. This led me to the wish to become a pastor, first in the Salvation Army, but that didn't work out, so I became a pastor in church. A long time I was a youth worker in church. In 2010, finally I became a Reformed minister. Have been living in Amsterdam all the time and doing my work from there. And now I'm a parish minister in a small village close to Amsterdam, and in Amsterdam itself. And in Amsterdam I'm also an LGBT minister. I'm 52. I'm single. What else do you want to know? And I've been involved in Christian LGBT activism, as I call it now, since 1989, when I wrote my first letter. But maybe I can tell something more about that later on.
Yes, definitely. So you already said something about your faith background. Can you tell our viewers and listeners what your sexual orientation is and your gender identity?
Yeah, forgetting all about that. No, I'm a gay man. My pronouns are he and him, so I identify as male.
What was it like to grow up in the Salvation Army? I mean, it's probably, I don't know where they're at right now with different sexualities and affirming LGBT IQ plus people. So how was it to grow up in a more conservative surrounding?
The conservative character of the Salvation Army didn't bother me very much at first, being a child. I liked being part of the Salvation Army because from a very young age you are involved in the work of the army. Here in the Netherlands, the Salvation Army is a separate church, and next to that there's all the social work. And when I grew up in the Salvation Army, it was still connected, but not so much. And I grew up in the church of the Salvation Army more. But also in the church, there was a very high level of involvement. And as a child, I really liked that because it gave you a lot of opportunities to identify yourself with this particular message, and also explain yourself. And I still pick the fruit of that upbringing. And what I also liked was that there was a high sense of urgency, a high sense of mission, which gives you a very profiled goal in the things you are doing. And of course, that's very much in your DNA when you are already a fourth generation Salvationist. But I think it connects to me personally as well, because I see the same sense of urgency in the work I do now. So that has stayed. Of course, when I was around 12, 13 years of age, I discovered my own sexual orientation, not being very representative, because it was a homosexual orientation. And, well, fortunately and unfortunately, at the same time, in the Salvation Army, the public debate around the way this church handled divergent sexual orientations came to the surface. There was one special edition of a magazine called Vrij Nederland, Free Netherlands. It originated from the Second World War. That gave a lot of attention to the Salvation Army, the whole edition. And a small part, one of the chapters was about homosexuality and how the Salvation Army handled their homosexual officers and Salvationists and other people belonging to the army. And at that time, it was 1982, that was not specifically very positive. So whenever it was public that you were homosexual, or if you were gay or lesbian, it was not longer possible to be active in particular functions or positions. Me being only 12, 13 and uncovering my feelings, I was lucky enough to find the possibility to identify positively with this word homosexual that was in this magazine. But on the other hand, I discovered that I was not in a very progressive context. And I did accept my own sexual orientation at a very young age. I think when I was 14, I recognized how difficult it would be in a community of the Salvation Army, but I personally, and as a person of faith, I was able to embrace it. But on the other hand, it was quite clear from a young age that I wouldn't be able to function normally, so to say, within the Salvation Army compared to someone heterosexual. And this, of course, posed a lot of challenges and too much challenges for a teenager. So from the organizational or the church perspective and the social perspective, I struggled with the discovery of my own sexual orientation. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think you said something. You were part of this documentary, and I can't remember if you said it in the documentary or afterwards in the conversation, but you said that you never struggled really to reconcile your faith and sexuality. Do you know why that is? I mean, it's with seeing all the LGBT people of faith who are really struggling, it's really interesting to hear.
Of course, later I heard of people that were struggling from the faith point of view, so to say, with their sexual orientation. And I wondered myself why I never had that struggle. I think it has to do with the position of my parents mainly. When I was 12, 13, they were already officers within the army, so they were paid pastors. And at that time, their own point of view was not particularly progressive or liberal, but I saw them evolving pastorally, also handling the pastoral challenges within their own practice and being very pragmatic about it, which is also very Dutch, I think. And what I didn't see it per se, but what I think experienced was the fact that they were able to embrace people unconditionally. And that was the way they expressed God's love. And at a particular time, I think I was 15, they even mentioned at the dinner table, whatever you may struggle with, even if you are homosexual, you can always come to us. And this was also an expression of the unconditional character of their attitudes, both as human beings, people of faith, and pastors. And I think this is in the DNA of my family, but because I have been so close to the pastoral practice of my parents, I have seen as a young child already, or as a teenager, how it works. And I think I integrated that at some level, more unconsciously than consciously. And what came to the forefront much earlier was the fact that I was angry about the unequal position of gay salvationists within the army. That was for me the what I struggled with more than being accepted or not by God. And I think the unconditional position of my parents has played an enormous role, because when I came out, I was 18. In that time and in Salvation Army circles, I was pretty early, and then indeed the reaction of my mother was unconditional, and it was clear that they would stand behind me all the way, and they never said it explicitly, but this is an expression of the unconditional love of God. Looking at it in retrospective, this is what it must have been.
Yeah, I mean, this proves how important it is for parents to stand behind their children and really love them unconditionally, and how much this can actually contribute to the well-being of a teenager, of a child, or whatever age the person is that comes out. Yeah, amazing. I'm so glad that you had this experience. I think that, even if some of us didn't have this experience, it's nice to hear, and because we always wonder, why is it so important, this support from our parents, and why do we miss it? But it is important.
Parents are the most important allies, because it is this unconditional support that you need as a child anyway, and then of course especially when you discover that your sexual orientation or gender identity isn't that of the majority, so to say, then you need this unconditional basis even more.
Yeah. I think for our whole lives, a certain respect, or even knowing that your parents are proud of you, is something special. I think when you can have that, and it's always something important to us. Tell me, you couldn't become a pastor in the Salvation Army and you wanted to. How is it for you now, looking back and not having been able to be a pastor in the Salvation Army?
The shortest answer is it is a blessing in disguise. I can honestly say that now. I decided to study theology, which was not a necessity for becoming a Salvation Army officer, but I'm glad I decided that, because it gave me a broader outlook on the world, so to say, because the Salvation Army back then was also a bubble, so to say, in which you could live your whole life. And it gave me some time to reflect on what I really wanted. And it gave me also the experience to be in a local community of the Salvation Army, a corps, in which my parents were not my pastors, and to experience firsthand all the adversity against homosexuality, and also the adversity against open homosexual being an active part of the Salvation Army. And these were not very nice years, the first years of my studies. I was 19, 20, 21, 23, 22. I very much wanted to be a part of the army, but the experience in the local community of the town where I also studied made clear that this was not a path for me to go. So I was not refused as an officer because I didn't even come to that point. Before actively deciding to register myself as a candidate, so as they name it in the Salvation Army, I already decided to withdraw. Of course that was pretty difficult because my grandparents were officers already, and this was what I really wanted, so it was really difficult to find a new orientation. But the theology study is very long, and I studied for 13 years, so it gave me a lot of time for my reorientation and to find a new perspective. And in the end, I found this in the church. And well, what I started off with, it was a blessing in disguise. I'm very happy that I made this decision. But looking at my relationship with the Salvation Army, I never hated the Salvation Army, but I was very angry for the fact that for me there was no place within that organization, because I was pretty sure I could have had a very good contribution with my talents. But over the years, of course, the relationship has changed, and now I am mainly very happy with the upbringing I had in the Salvation Army. The high level of involvement and the high level of urgency, which I also take with me in my work as a pastor in church, and also within my Christian LGBT activism. So the Salvation Army has given me a good basis for my work now.
So you already started to talk about activism. So what was kind of was it a moment even, or what motivated you and got you into activism?
Well, what got me into activism was not the LGBT case in the first place, but it was when I found out that the Salvation Army in South Africa also adhered to the rules of apartheid. That was back in 1984, I think, when I was only 15. I was so appalled by that that I wrote a letter to the general, the Pope of the Salvation Army. It was Jarl Wallström at the time, asking about that situation and what was the policy of the Salvation Army. And he answered me with a personal letter, with which I was completely unsatisfied. So that was the beginning of my activism within church, so to say. But in 1989, when I was Salvationist for a year and a half, and I started my studies, I got into touch with another openly gay Salvationist, and we decided to write an open letter to the board of the Salvation Army in the Netherlands, so to say, but an open letter that will be published in the newspapers. And well, that was kind of the beginning of my activism within the Salvation Army, apart from a letter that I wrote to the Ethical Commission of the Salvation in the Netherlands, writing that I was that the inequality in the orders and regulations of the Salvation Army, considering the position of gay and lesbian Salvationists, was something I felt very uneasy with. And I asked, what is your position here and what can we do about it? And this letter and the open letter that was issued in several newspapers, and that really created a row within the Salvation Army, was the beginning of what I now call my Christian LGBTI activism. Yeah.
What keeps you going? I mean, you are full of energy. I sometimes when I look and hear what you are doing, I'm kind of thinking, oh, I would love to have about 25% of his energy. So what keeps you driving, moving, going, and your energy up?
Well, I always say not every LGBTI person has to be an activist. So we all have our own talents and abilities and also simply interests. And what keeps me going is partly my heritage. So what I already told you, this sense of urgency. But it's also calling, I think. The calling to make sure that all people feel welcome in church and all people are welcome to go on the road towards the realm of God, and that nobody is left behind. And me discovering that I was gay, and also discovering my talents to play a role in this activism, but also in what I could do about this within churches, and simply growing in this role. So it has not always been like it is now. I became a member of a Christian LGBT association, which gave me possibilities to become active in, for example, organizing coming out weekends, being part of a regional board. And it was gradually that I discovered my abilities and my talents, and then you grow in this role. It almost goes automatically, and now I think it was only later on that I discovered it also being a calling, something that I don't like using these words so much, but it is I think something that God asked me to do, or at least the Christian LGBT community asks me to do, and I experience their appreciation. So I know that I'm doing it for a good reason or for some reason. And what keeps me going is that I have seen progress. Not only in general, but progress from the things I have been doing myself. For example, in my old church in the Salvation Army, over the years, now already 30 years, more than 30 years, I've seen progress in that denomination. And I have seen LGBTI people of faith growing in defining and formulating their own voice. And of course the World Wide Web and the Internet plays an important role here. And these are elements that have kept me going. And it is so much integrated in who I am now. And in my DNA, I always say that I don't think there will ever be a period that I will not be involved in some way or other.
What would you say that are the major problems that you are addressing maybe right now or want to address through your activism?
David Bos, he was with us in one of the programs during the European Forum conference. He has identified the debate on sexual orientation and gender identity as an identity marker within cultures, but also within churches, and sometimes this goes together. And what we see in the Netherlands, but also internationally, is that this debate becomes more important all the time in defining whether or not you see yourself as conservative or as progressive. And what to me is very important now, I always look at this from 2 points of view, the more political activist point of view and the church point of view. Both of them are equally important to me. And what I think is urgent now is that churches involve themselves much more than they do now in the public debate about sexual orientation and gender identity. One reason is because in Western Europe churches become part of a minority much more, and if they want to stay relevant, they have to involve themselves in this public debate. But another important reason, or there are three reasons actually. The second important reason is that the church has something to add to this conversation, I think, things that are worthwhile to contribute. And the third reason is that the church, for me, should be a human rights advocate, and can be such an advocate in participating in this public debate, showing that they stand behind the struggles of LGBTI people. And especially churches in Western Europe have to take up that role. So they have become more inclusive and welcoming, also the church that I myself belong to. And now the next step is to be courageous enough to be part of this public debate. And I think they have to do this also in international networks of their organizations. For example, the World Council of Churches, the World Community of Reformed Churches, the Lutheran World Federation. There they have to talk to each other about this topic, because it is such an important identity marker now. And for me, this is very urgent. Because you see developments in countries like Poland and Hungary, but also in Romania, where we see kind of backlash in how the development of human rights and LGBT rights, especially, how they are supported or not supported. And church can play an important role there in developing the consciousness of their members and of culture in general. So for me, this is the most urgent thing now, and we see this public debate around topics as like gender ideology or gender identity, conversion therapy, the position of women, and I would like churches to play a much more important role in this debate as they do now. And to share one thing, you have heard it already, but to share one thing that really disappointed me was the refusal of the General Secretary of the Conference of European Churches to receive our RISE index, the Rainbow Index for European Churches, out of our hands. I think this is, for me, completely unacceptable in 2021, that the organization of churches is not willing to receive such a important report that can help them in the public debates.
What do you think is happening in the churches that it's so hard for them to stand up for people, for human rights, or just doing something like receiving a gift, what you mentioned?
Well, what I see in the Netherlands and in several other Western European churches is that they are very much struggling to survive. So they become more inward looking, and I think that's a very important reason why it's hard for them to give attention to topics like sexual orientation and gender identity. But what I see in separate churches, what I see in church organization, like for example our National Council of Churches, is that it's still seen as a sensitive topic, and that there is a kind of insecurity in how to handle it. So what I hear time and again, which is very tiresome and annoying, is that yes, they say yes, it's a very important topic, but we have to debate it with each other, and we have to see where we stand theologically and ethically, and that wears me down a little, because we have seen all these debates already for many years, and it's like something. It can be perceived as something that they almost hide behind, not to come with a very clear point of view, and so that's church politics, so to say. Another thing is that there's a particular insecurity in how they should handle this practically, and so we try to offer them the model of being safe communities, and that you can work on being a safe community without having to go into this tiresome theological and ethical debates. But it is just thinking locally, what do we need to be a welcoming and affirming community locally, and how we can create models for that, or activities, or particular narrative, or instruments, and churches find it hard to realize that. Well, so we try to support them, and I think this very much is the case in Western Europe, and I think in Central and Eastern Europe, the difficulty is much more that churches are. They have missed part of the discussion we had in the Western Europe, I think, and also that churches let them being abused, so to say, by national politics. So they become part of this whole dynamics of building a national identity that creates the foundation for certain political parties to get a lot of power. You see this very clearly in Poland, but also in Hungary. And the churches are also eager to contribute to what are family values, or traditional values, or whatever they may call it. And apparently this is an easier road for churches to go than look at people who are struggling with questions around sexual orientation and gender identity, and identifying them as the people they should be involved with. So the dynamics, I think, between Western and Eastern Europe are different, but I think this is a part of why churches struggle, why a lot of churches struggle with it.
Yeah. Yeah, well, one thing you said about, the relevance of the church, I found it very interesting. I was at a conference organized by a German university. I'm not going to get into details on anti-gender stance in the east of Europe. And it was very interesting what one theologian said. She said, I have very much respect towards churches who disagree, who say they need time. But I just want to let you know, you are becoming irrelevant for the public discussion. Like, we can't wait all the time until you're ready. Like, you'll just become irrelevant. And that's unfortunately a huge problem. And I think that she had a lot of truth in what she said. So when you look, you already mentioned one thing that you see that changed within all these years of your work. Are there any other things that you find important that you see have changed since your beginnings of being an advocate, an activist till now?
So within churches, progress, especially here in the Netherlands. But the other thing I see is to stay in the theme of the last conference, that our voices have become stronger. When I began in the Salvation Army, I did not know where to look, and there were no possibilities to find anyone. It was thanks to our open letter that we received letters from the UK and the States, all written letters, because where there was no internet and no mobile phone, and these were my first international contacts within the Salvation Army, and later, and this is greatly thanks to the World Wide Web and the internet. We were able to reach each other, and you see the development of the European Forum. I think the positive development of the European Forum also has to do with that. So we were able to find each other, to share stories, and to find platforms on which we can share these stories, not only amongst ourselves but also with others. And when I look at the Netherlands, especially in the 80s, it was mainly gays and lesbians from the mainstream churches that organized within the LKP, the organization that I have been the chair of for some years. And really, after the internet came about, it was also possible for more traditional or Christians from traditional backgrounds to find each other and organize, and they did. It was internet-based organizations, but also organizations in real life. And this has contributed greatly to finding our voice and expressing it. And what has helped also is that here in the Netherlands we received public funding to make a project possible. And until now, not nationally, but on a national basis, when I'm informed correctly, it's only the Netherlands and Sweden where Christian LGBT organizations receive public funding, and of course, then your work can really expand. And the Dutch government, but also the European Union, also has seen the necessity to support LGBT organizations in general, but also religious LGBT organizations to do their work and to support this specific voice. And it has helped the European Forum to also become part of the work of the Council of Europe, which is a completely different arena than the church arena, but also find our possibilities to disseminate to make our voice heard there, but also to disseminate the products of our work there. And this is something that also has really changed in the last 20 years. And this recognition is very important because we are a minority, we'll stay a minority, and we need such support to make our case.
Yeah. Especially LGBT people, because often, they cannot find support from any religious foundations. It's still most of the time probably impossible. And then on the other hand, it was very hard to get funds from the European Union or governmental organizations or the governments itself. Yeah, so that's a huge thing. Yeah, so if you would get a magic wand right now and someone would tell you, there is one thing you can change right away for all LGBT people in the world, just to make it hard for you, what would it be you'd change?
That's a difficult question. Not difficult because I do not know how to answer it, because there are so many possibilities. Well, talking from the LGBT faith point of view, because that's that's my agenda, so to say. I would change all the religious communities into affirming and welcoming communities at the same time, because I know it's so important to be appreciated for who you are there, because it is impossible to separate yourself from your sexual orientation or gender identity, but it's also impossible to separate yourself from your faith identity. I think this plays such an essential role in your life, and being able to take that tension away in people's life, that would be a great joy. Yeah.
I think that, if you would do that, I like your answer, because I think that many countries have a problem because of the negative influence by the faith communities. So yeah, I like that wish. Okay, if I find someone who has a wand, and I'll send them your way. Or her or them. I will. So what message would you give to the people who are struggling concerning their rights, positions, because of their religious institutions in their country? I know it's a very wide question and it's different from country to country, but yeah, a word of encouragement, or even something that you would like to share.
Yeah. I love the church very much because I think it still holds a big promise for people and for the world. So if it's possible, discovering your own sexual orientation or gender identity and still be part of a church and share there the message of who you are yourself, then please do that. But I always say to people also here in the Netherlands, if this possibility is not given, then please turn away from the church. So my message would be, if it's impossible for you to stay within your family or within your church because people simply will not appreciate you for who you are, then please turn away from that and find people who you can really confide in, who can be your new family, with whom you can form a new community, because I think that is important for your personal well-being, both mentally, physically, and spiritually. And I think that is a God-chosen path for you then as well. It sounds contradictory, but if that is the path of liberation and which leads to being a whole human being, then please go on that path and leave it to activists like me to create a better church, better faith community.
Yes. Yeah, well, at this point, I really want to point out the European Forum, because it has exactly been what you were talking about now. To many people, family, a chosen family where they felt welcome, and they also had a connection with their spiritual side of life. And so, if you're interested in having something like that, just click the link of the European Forum, find out, how you can be part. Every year there's a conference. Of course, now it's a little bit harder. The European Forum just had a conference in the Netherlands. Well, it was happening from the Netherlands mostly. Yeah. But we hope that we'll meet live again. And yeah, that's maybe something that you can join next year. That's hopefully going to happen in Switzerland live again. If not, you can at least be part online of the community and start getting to know some people. So please don't give up. Is there anything that you would like to add that you think is important to add? From a European point of view, European Forum point of view, I'm of course very involved still. What I really hope in the last few years, since 2012, we have been able to do much more, and the European Forum as an organization in itself became much more important. So the international part of it. And what I hope is that this is a message to the members of the member groups of the European Forum, is that we can get involved with each other on this international level much more. I do understand that nationally in some countries there's still a lot to do, but I hope we can in some way join forces. And I think the RISE project has been a very important example of how we can work together to make something possible that it has an international character, and that we can contribute on that level. And I hope we together see the opportunities in the future to do so again, and to be a European voice also in the nearby future. Yes. I think that's very necessary. Great. Thank you so much, Willy, for being my guest, for agreeing to do that. One thing I didn't mention, and I actually had it written down, but somehow it got lost within all the questions. For all your work that you did, and I know that some people heard it, but if someone is just watching this video, they will not know that you got a great recognition just 2 weeks ago. Was it 2 weeks ago? Yeah. And you became knighted by the king of the Netherlands. So I'm so glad for you that you got this recognition. How do you feel about this recognition?
Well, it's great. Yeah, I'm not the first Christian LGBT activist in the Netherlands to be knighted for this work. The first was during the last conference in 2012, Gea Zijlstra, on whose shoulders I stand. But of course, I was surprised. I was pleasantly surprised. But why I think it's very important is because of the recognition. So there's public recognition for this Christian LGBTI activism, and I hope we can all bear the fruit of this recognition, and that it helps to open doors and make people listen. And apart from that, it was a great day. We partied for 2 days because King's Day is the day after the day that the recognitions are presented. And it was 2 wonderful days with beautiful weather and of celebration. And well, of course, I'm honored to have received the recognition, and it's also at the same time pretty clear that it was not possible to do it without a lot of people, of course, also being involved and supporting this work. So it really also is a recognition of all the work that has been done by Christian LGBT activists also within the organizations over the last 40 years, and yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
I'm still receiving flowers and mails and cards because of this reason, and well, that makes it even more gives it even more celebratory character.
Let it last. Let it last. It's
I will.
It's
I
nice.
will.
Yeah, it's nice when the gifts come a little bit later. Not everything
Look
at
at
the
the
same
flowers
time.
here.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
Only given to me last week. So I'm still looking at things that remind me of this wonderful occasion.
Beautiful. I envy you because here, unfortunately, they still don't have this tradition. I don't know. It's somehow discriminating. They don't give flowers to men, unfortunately. And I would love to receive some flowers. So yeah, so I'll probably have to wait till I'm knighted. I don't know by whom here in Croatia, but it doesn't matter. Yeah. Well, you mentioned that there is a pattern. Someone was knighted in 2012 when you had a conference in the Netherlands, and now that you had a conference, so that means you have to organize the conference more often in the Netherlands, that more people get knighted, if it's somehow connected.
Until now, we do so every 10 years, so we have some time to work on a new knight in 10 years' time.
Good. Well, thank you so much for being with me. Thank you, dear viewers and listeners, for taking this time and being with us and listening to Willy's story. As I said in the beginning, this podcast is made in partnership with the European Forum of LGBT Christian Groups. And of course, you can give a donation to the European Forum and to the podcast. There will be links, at least, to the European Forum. Down there, I will ask Willy if he has something interesting that he can share in the podcast description. So for now, this is it for today. Thank you again to everyone, and we'll see you in a week's time. Until then, bye everyone. Bye.